A Fox News alert as the Obama administration has taken aim at Israel, and Israel is now firing back. Strained relations reaching a new low as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responding to a blistering attack condemning Israeli settlements. And the Prime Minister's words equally as harsh and really unprecedented. Brand new hour of America's Newsroom. Nice to be with you at home. I'm Leland Vittert.
And I'm Heather Childers. Bill and Martha are off. Blistering, harsh words, you can call it that as well, and hard feelings after Secretary of State John Kerry warns Israel is threatening the chances for peace by expanding settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Prime Minister Netanyahu slamming Kerry's speech.
Secretary Kerry said that the United States cannot vote against its own policy. But that's exactly what it did at the UN. And that's why Israel opposed last week's Security Council resolution, because it effectively calls the Western Wall occupied Palestinian territory, because it encourages boycotts and sanctions against Israel. That's what it effectively does. And because it reflects a radical shift in U.S. policy towards the Palestinians on final status issues, those issues that we always agreed, the U.S. and Israel, have to be negotiated directly, face-to-face, without preconditions.
Rich Edson live at the State Department this morning. Rich, so unusual, not only the back and forth in this kind of way, but also that Secretary Kerry comes out in the middle of Christmas week and delivers what is essentially a major policy address. Take us through the timing.
Well, and Leland, especially since there are only about 3 weeks to go in the Obama administration, and the incoming Trump administration will very likely have a much different foreign policy view than this one. For Secretary of State John Kerry, in his words, he says that he delivered this speech and the outgoing administration cannot, in good conscience, as he put it, do nothing and say nothing when we see the hope of peace slipping away. So he delivered this speech and mostly criticized Israel on its settlement building.
Some seem to believe that the U.S. friendship means the U.S. must accept any policy, regardless of our own interests, our own positions, our own words, our own principles, even after urging again and again that the policy must change. Friends need to tell each other the hard truths, and friendships require mutual respect.
Kerry did acknowledge that there is one of many impediments is the settlement issue to peace in the Middle East. He called out the Palestinians for failing to crack down more on terrorism and for glorifying terrorists by renaming streets after them, public squares after them. Yet the majority of this speech was criticism of Israel on the settlement issue. He also said that the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is the most right-wing in Israeli history, with an agenda driven by the most extreme elements. Shortly after this speech, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, released a statement that says he is willing to resume peace discussions if Israel stops its settlement building, Leland.
Well, picking up on what John Kerry said, it was Benjamin Netanyahu a couple of days ago who said that friends don't take friends to the Security Council. This all started with that UN resolution that the U.S. didn't veto. Did Secretary Kerry talk about that, this accusation by the Israelis that they have evidence that the U.S. orchestrated the resolution?
Now, he did. This did all start about a week ago, and much of the speech yesterday was in defense of the U.S. action. The U.S. abstained from blocking that resolution. While it didn't vote for the resolution, abstaining allowed it to pass the UN Security Council. The Israelis have charged the U.S. did a lot more than that and actually orchestrated this vote. That's something Kerry denies.
The United States did not draft or originate this resolution, nor did we put it forward. It was drafted by Egypt. It was drafted in Egypt, which is one of Israel's closest friends in the region, in coordination with the Palestinians and others.
Israel, Secretary of State John Kerry also says that this, and framed this as something that's not new for U.S. policy. He says that previous administrations of both political parties have allowed resolutions that were critical of Israel to pass, including on settlements. But Israel views this as a parting shot from an administration that neither side really ever embraced, and that was on full view yesterday, Leland, both here in Washington and in Israel.
Well, certainly there, as the Israelis say, they have ironclad information to the contrary that they'll release later. Rich Edson, State Department, thanks so much, sir.
saying they'll release that to President-elect Donald Trump, who was also speaking out against the Obama administration for its stance on Israel, which some critics say is an attempt to hinder his transition into power.
What did you think of Secretary Kerry's speech today?
Speaks for itself. Everybody knows, Mr. Lauder. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President, do you think they're trying to undermine you?
Peter Ducey live for us in Palm Beach, Florida. Peter, is the president-elect proposing any sort of quick fix at the UN, so to speak, once he's sworn in?
No, Heather, the president-elect is instead describing the United Nations as an institution that causes problems instead of solves problems, and he's suggesting that this 193-member body actually favors America's enemies over America's friends.
I'm very, very strong on Israel. I think Israel's been treated very, very unfairly by a lot of different people. You look at resolutions in the United Nations, you take a look at what's happened. They're up for 20 reprimands, and other nations that are horrible places that treat people horribly haven't even been reprimanded.
The president-elect says the United Nations is a waste of time and money unless it lives up to its potential, but he says it does have potential. Heather.
All right, so another big issue, Russia. What does the president-elect think about possible punishment for Russia for apparently interfering with the American election?
Heather, he certainly is not endorsing sanctions against Russia for their alleged involvement in election day hacking, and he's actually now still expressing skepticism that they had anything to do with any kind of digital interference on election day here in the United States. He said again last night when he popped out from a party for staff and friends at Mar-a-Lago that he just thinks it's hard to point a finger at one person or another when the crime committed happened in cyberspace.
I think we ought to get on with our lives. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on. We have speed, we have a lot of other things, but I'm not sure you have the kind of security that you need. But I have not spoken with the senators, and I certainly will be over a period of time.
Mr. Trump also took a shot at Republican Senator Lindsey Graham last night. Graham, for the last few days, has been pitching personal sanctions against Putin, Russia's president. Mr. Trump says he doesn't know what Graham is doing, hasn't spoken to the South Carolina senator, but he reminded reporters that Graham did run against him. Heather?
Yeah, we spoke with him along with Senator John McCain right here on this program yesterday about that. A very patriotic Don King standing next to him there. Thank you so much for joining us, Peter.
Looked like a good party.
Yeah.
Thanks, Heather.
More on this. Mike Warren, online editor for the Weekly Standard. Mike, nice to see you. We won't ask you to comment on Don King's outfit. Speaks for itself, I guess.
Good.
Everyone is talking about how unprecedented this is, not only in the sense of the way the United States has, some would say, thrown Israel under the bus, others said let the bus just hit Israel and didn't get him out of the way, but it's also unprecedented in the sense that we've never really seen this kind of foreign policy gulf between an incoming and outgoing administration. Even Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Clinton, Bush, Bush, Obama. Did we ever see this kind of public dispute between the incoming president and the current president?
Not one this wide. I think there's always this this sense from the outgoing administration that there's only one president at a time, and this is something we're certainly hearing from the Obama administration. But the sort of last-minute, real sort of outlandish statements from John Kerry, the whole debacle at the UN last week, I think really suggests that the Obama administration sees their role in these final days is to really sort of plant their flag and say this is where we think U.S. policy needs to be in opposition to what they see as sort of a polar opposite in the incoming Trump administration. It really is unprecedented, and but it is quite clarifying as well to show you the differences, I think, between the Obama foreign policy and not just the incoming Trump administration, but sort of the more mainstream foreign policy, at least on Israel, in both parties.
Yeah, well, yeah, big differences. Also big differences in style. John Kerry, 73 minutes. Donald Trump, 240-character tweet saying this: "We cannot continue to let Israel be threatened with such total disdain and disrespect." They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but, ... not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal, and now this, UN, Stay Strong Israel, January 20th, is fast approaching. Secretary Kerry then came back on MSNBC saying essentially, look, this doesn't help much, and not only that, agree, disagree with either of us, but this really puts our allies in an uncomfortable spot when you have sort of this incredible disagreement, to your point, one president at a time.
Right, but the question then I would propose to Secretary Kerry is, why make this speech with just 20 some odd days left in the Obama administration? What is going to change in terms of U.S. policy that, in these last 20 days that's going to have a big effect? The one thing that all of this in this last week will do is, one, tie Donald Trump's hands in a lot of ways with respect to the international law coming down on Israel with this UN resolution. I think there's going to be a lot of legal consequences for Israel in international court if this does go forward. And Donald Trump doesn't really have a lot of recourse, at least in the United Nations Security Council, because Russia and China have veto power just like the United States if the United States does try to push for undoing this resolution. And then more broadly, the different messages coming from both Secretary Kerry and the incoming Trump administration is quite confusing, and it's a two-way street. I think Secretary Kerry and the Obama administration does have some agency here. They don't have to be doing these things, and yet they are.
Well, and as you point out, especially with this UN resolution, possible long-lasting consequences that the new administration can't roll back. Mike, got to leave it there. Appreciate it, sir.
Thanks.
All the best. Happy New Year. Heather?
Well, Israel firing back at Secretary of State John Kerry for his speech criticizing the Israeli government. We will speak with a former Israeli ambassador to the UN.
Charities are seeking outside help with fundraising this busy holiday season. Time to donate, perhaps, but how much of your donation is going to pay for that outside help, for all those phone calls and telemarketers, instead of actually your money going to the charity itself? Important question.
And could a virtual assistant hold the key to solving a murder case? Some prosecutors seem to think so, and our legal panel will weigh in on the role Amazon Echo and similar technology could play in the courts.
Colonel Mustard did it in the living room with the candlestick. What they're looking for is maybe a snippet.
It's a massive powder day up in the high country in Colorado, and traffic is once again flowing on the major interstate, I-70. Snow shut down a number of lanes, and there were some big pileups, as you can see. Mangled mess in Silverthorne, just west of Denver, where you'd get off to go to either Keystone or Breckenridge. A lot of cars damaged on I-70. Investigators say 25 cars were involved in those crashes, and it took crews 3 hours to clean it all up. Thankfully, no serious injuries, though.
In the end, we did not agree with every word in this resolution. There are important issues that are not sufficiently addressed or even addressed at all. But we could not in good conscience veto a resolution that condemns violence and incitement and reiterates what has been for a long time the overwhelming consensus and international view on settlements.
Secretary of State John Kerry defending the decision to allow a UN resolution condemning Israeli settlements in territory claimed by the Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later blasting the speech, calling it biased against Israel. Dan Gillerman is a former Israeli ambassador to the UN and a Fox News contributor, and he joins us now with some more insight in his opinion. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's good to be with you, Heather.
So hopefully you heard the sound that we pulled there from Secretary of State John Kerry. He said that in good conscience, the United States could not veto this resolution. Do you think that they should have?
Oh, definitely. They should have. They've vetoed similar resolutions before. And why they did this and did not veto this resolution belongs, I believe, to the psychology department rather than the diplomatic arena. It is a very, very real betrayal of an ally, of their only and the most loyal ally in the region and maybe in the world. But, you know, in a way, we shouldn't be surprised, because this administration and this president have really let down their allies time and time again. They've let down the people of Iran and signed a horrible deal with Ayatollahs. They've drawn red lines in Syria and let Assad butcher 500,000 of his own people. They've thrown President Mubarak of Egypt under the bus and supported the Muslim Brotherhood. They've led from behind in Libya. They've actually created a situation where their allies feel they cannot, and the enemies feel they can get away with murder. It's just a pity that at the very last minute, during Christmas and the holiday time, they decided to add Israel to this very sorry list of achievements.
Yeah, President Obama's criticism of Israeli settlements going back to 2009 in the speech that he gave in Cairo. In reference to settlements and the amount of time that was spent on that in this 70-minute speech that Secretary Kerry gave, he mentioned settlements, I think, 42 times. He referred to Hezbollah as a militant group, Hamas. He talked about them at 4 times. The focus on settlements, what did you think about that?
Well, first of all, I think you did a great job by pointing out the number of times that Secretary Kerry touched upon issues which should worry the world today. There was hardly any mention of terror. As you said, there was a very little mention of Iran, which is probably the most dangerous country in the world today. And this obsessive concentration on settlements, which, are really not the problem. I mean, with everything that is, with hundreds of thousands of people being butchered in Syria, with people being homeless, with terror, with Iran terrorizing the world, this is what matters. I think even the United States and even Secretary Kerry realized that settlements are not the problem. The problem is the settlement. Once there'll be a settlement, the settlements will not be a problem. Israel has proven it time and time again. When we made peace with Egypt and gave back every inch, including settlements, when we made peace with Jordan, when we evacuated unilaterally Gaza and gave it back to the Palestinians, who turned it into a launching pad for missiles and a terror base. Time and time again, when we gave up settlements, we were rewarded by war and by rockets. But at the end of the day, if we have a Palestinian partner who is viable and who is willing to be pragmatic, we will also give up settlements. But settlements are not the problem. And concentrating on them, making them the focal point of your farewell speech, to me, is pathetic.
So on that point, though, saying that Israel would be willing to give up some settlements, what if East Jerusalem and the West Bank had been left out of this resolution?
Well, I think still this would have been a bad resolution, because the conflict cannot be settled, and actually President Obama is the one who said it at the UN. Neither by UN resolutions nor by foreign powers, only by the parties themselves. And by prejudging the settlement and by having this resolution, they are actually halting and, in a way, damaging the peace process and preventing the two sides from reaching an agreement. I think this is not only, this is damaging, this is counterproductive, and at the same time, it was a real betrayal of Israel. Doing this on the eve of the Sabbath, and then having that speech by Secretary Kerry during Christmas time, both the Secretary and the President are leaving this world in a much more dangerous place than they found it.
Yeah, many people
Everywhere
agree
you
with
look around, terror is reigning. And at the end of the day, to make settlements the focal point of your legacy makes it a very poor legacy, and I'm really sorry that happened.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. We are out of time. As I said, a lot of people agree with you. We'll see what this means for the administration moving forward, that being the Trump administration. Thank you.
Crunch time for the transition. The White House ramming through some last-minute measures that could jam up President-elect Trump's plans for his new administration.
A sinkhole and a gas leak forcing dozens of people from their homes. A delivery man calling the fire department when he spotted this. this giant hole in the middle of the street. This was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Firefighters detecting a strong odor of gas, evacuating about 20 homes. That's a 4-block area that's closed to traffic. Several residents sheltering at a nearby school. Utility crews eventually shutting off the gas and making repairs.
Even before President Trump's inauguration, the new Congress will get to work. Next week, Republican lawmakers are looking to pass 3 key bills. The man of the hour, Doug McKelway, live from Washington. So what's first out of the gate, Doug?
Well, first piece of legislation coming down the pike, Leland, that we expect to see is going to be the REINS Act. That is short for Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny. In other words, the Republican Congress wants to yank the reins on the wave of regulations and executive actions that Obama has been passing. According to its chief sponsor, Representative Doug Collins of Georgia, Congress is partly to blame. In a statement, he said, "We've ceded our legislative responsibility to agencies that were never intended to make laws, and the result has been redundant, counterproductive rules that have massive impacts on our economy." Speaker Paul Ryan, in his recent 60 Minutes interview, indicated that these regulations are slowing the economy.
We really want to focus on economic growth and growing the economy. There are a lot of regulations that are really just crushing jobs. Look at the coal miners in the Rust Belt that are getting out of work. Look at the loggers and the timber workers in the paper mills in the West Coast. Look at the ranchers or farmers in the Midwest with the regulations.
In addition, published reports indicate Congress is also set to unleash the Midnight Rules Act, which would allow Congress to block the flurry of 11th-hour rules that the administration is unleashing in its waning weeks. Also said to be up for immediate congressional action, a resolution disapproving of the UN Security Council's recent vote to condemn Israel for its settlements, a vote which the administration abstained from. It was a break from long-held U.S. foreign policy. Leland, back to you.
So how do the Democrats play into this? Obviously, President Obama still has veto power over anything that Congress passes, and the Democrats may be in the minority, but they can still make a lot of waves in the Senate.
That's right. Well, it's in the new Congress. It's going to be absolute warfare, but it always is. And one sign of what we can expect, Democrats have already announced that they'll be holding a day of action in cities across America on January 15th, before the inauguration, to attack the new Republican health care agenda. They're going to make the case that the GOP is going to try to dismantle health care from what they claim are 30 million Americans, that they will end guaranteed Medicare benefits for millions of older Americans by converting Medicare into a voucher program, that they're going to try to slash Medicaid and threaten nursing home care for more than 4 million vulnerable seniors. Now, Republicans obviously dismiss this as wild scare tactics that bear no resemblance to what their agenda really is. But it's all an indication of the battles we will see in another couple of weeks.
Bloody battles they will be. Doug McKelway in Washington. Thanks, Doug.
It's a pleasure.
Well, new developments in a Russian military plane crash, what investigators are now ruling out in the deaths of all 92 people on board.
And get this, technology, the stuff you have in your house, maybe got for Christmas, could play a role in a murder investigation as prosecutors try to get a hold of the defendant's virtual assistant known as an Amazon Echo. So, can the device be used as evidence? What could it tell us? Our legal panel coming up next. Fox News alert as Russian investigators haven't found any evidence of an explosion causing a Russian military plane to crash, but they say they are not ruling out foul play. The plane's flight data recorders, the black boxes, show no sign of an explosion before the plane crashed after takeoff into the Black Sea. But a cockpit conversation reveals the captain saying there was a, quote, special situation unfolding. No word yet on what he was referring to. All 92 people on board were killed in that crash.
Prosecutors in Arkansas hoping to obtain a warrant for Amazon Echo data that they hope can help in a murder case against James Bates, accused of murdering a coworker at his home last year. Amazon has so far refused to give the data up. And joining me now is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Sam Zanganeh and defense attorney Whitney Bone. Thank you both for joining us.
Good morning.
So, Whitney, I'll start with you. Explain to people what exactly is this Amazon Echo?
Well, what it is it's a cylindrical device, basically, that responds to your voice and performs certain functions within your home, operates certain equipment, appliances. based upon recognition of your voice. So it has the capability, in theory, I guess, of recording information in terms of what you say, and it's supposed to stop recording, according to Amazon, when you stop speaking. What remains to be seen in light of this search warrant is whether or not it's actually recording all the time, and I know there's been some sort of suspicion about that and some discussion about that in the past few months as this has become a more popular device and is selling more.
Yeah, and some, in this particular case, Amazon refusing to give over the details of what was taken from the server. They did give account details, purchases like that, but the police did say they were able to retrieve some of that information. Should that be allowed to be used? Some?
Well, I think that's kind of the million-dollar question here. I think Amazon, like most media formats, they're going to struggle at the inception as to whether or not they're going to hand over this kind of information, this kind of private information, to law enforcement. But at the end of the day, this apparatus is kind of like having a cell phone or a laptop or any of the other kind of day-to-day uses that we have in our, in our homes. So I'm pretty sure that Amazon's going to give way, kind of like, Facebook has given way to allow law enforcement to be able to extract this data.
And Whitney, can they force Amazon to turn over the information?
Well, in theory, yes. If there's this murder investigation and the judge has signed a search warrant and said, Amazon, you need to produce this information, if it's information that Amazon can produce, in other words, if it's feasible for them to do so, and it's not an overly broad or overly burdensome request, they're going to have to do it. I believe the search warrant includes language that it spans a few things, including transcribed, recorded information, recordings themselves, and then other data. Something like other data, now that's harder to comply with, and they may have some challenge to that specific language. Yeah. But generally speaking, the court's within its right to do this warrant. It's just an issue of how broadly is this going to be interpreted in the future in terms of future law enforcement requests for search warrants. That's going to be an interesting legal area that's going to continue to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other data in this specific case, he had a lot of smart devices throughout the home, one of those being the water meter, and the person who was found in his home was found strangled and drowned. And so they're using some of that information as well. But some, as Whitney just referenced, moving forward to other cases and the implications for those. It's called what? The Internet of Things, or IoTs. I wasn't familiar with that, but how they will in fact be used as evidence in future cases.
Well, here's the thing. We have to understand that technology and law are going to progress hand in hand. And during this progression, really good lawyers like Whitney and great lawyers like myself, we're going to be able to defend our clients when we deal with technology in these kind of situations, like with this apparatus that we're talking about, Alexa. When there's a voice command that's given, it's kind of like when I'm using my iPhone and I'm talking to Siri. Sometimes when I tell Siri to do something, it doesn't necessarily come out with what I tell her. So there's going to be areas for defense attorneys and people that are situated in similar places like myself and Whitney to be able to really do our due diligence and make sure that our clients are protected. But it's the advent of the future, and it's what we should be prepared for.
And Whitney, how do you protect your clients? I mean, where does it end in terms of the devices that can be used in these cases?
Well, and if you want the best lawyer answer I can give you, don't have these devices, especially if you're going to be in some sort of position where you think you might potentially be exposed to criminal prosecution, because the more technology that you're surrounded with, the more the police are going to have access to. That's not the fun answer, that's the lawyer answer. But I certainly think
don't commit a murder with an Alexa on.
Exactly. Or don't be suspected of a crime, even if you're actually innocent,
right.
And have an Alexa around you as well. But I think Sam raises a good point in terms of, this technology. The law sometimes does have to catch up to it. I mean, we see this all the time, and this is a good example. It's going to have to catch up to the fact that, we're surrounded with all of these devices, and how are those devices authenticated as evidence in terms of any information on them in a court of law? Are they automatically going to be admitted, and then someone can argue the weight of the evidence in terms of this isn't something you can prove it's my client or not? Or are we going to use that as a predicate to even have them be admissible in a court of law? These are interesting issues that we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be interesting as a lawyer.
We saw it come up in terms of accessing the phones in the San Bernardino terrorist situation. Yep. Okay, thank you both for joining us. Appreciate it, and have a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Always a pleasure. You
Bye-bye.
too. Happy New Year.
Critics blasting a new White House move to protect Western lands from development. President Obama has designated 2 national monuments covering more than 1.6 million acres in Utah and in Nevada, despite a lot of local opposition. White House correspondent Kevin Corke with the president as he vacations in Honolulu, Hawaii. Still early morning there. Why are there so many competing interests fighting over this land use, and why now, Kevin?
Well, listen, that's really what's at the crux of the issue, right, Lucky? I mean, ultimately, President Obama is within his rights to use the Antiquities Act to create these national monuments. But keep this in mind, he's already done it to create 29 national monuments, setting aside more than 553 million acres of federal land and water. In case you're wondering, that is by far the most in U.S. presidential history. This latest move, however, is controversial. As you point out, a lot of people still fighting over the use of this land. We're talking about the Bears Ears and Gold Butte National Monuments, more than 1.6 million acres of land in southeastern Utah and a swath of Nevada desert after years of political fights over the fate of those areas. Let me just share part of the president's statement. It reads this way: following years of public input and various proposals to protect, that is, both of these areas, including legislation and a proposal from tribal governments in and around Utah, these monuments will protect places that a wide range of stakeholders all agree are worthy of protection. He goes on to add, we also have worked to ensure that tribes and local communities can continue to access and benefit from these lands for generations to come. Needless to say, this is still a controversial issue because, as you could obviously glean just from those words there, Leland, there are a lot of people that don't agree with setting aside all this land, despite the fact that it may be protected from further development. Leland?
Now, a lot of people calling it a federal land grab. Can Congress do anything about this, either now or once Mr. Trump comes into office?
Boy, that's the real complicated question. And I'm going to give you sort of a simple answer, and the answer is we don't know. Because, as I mentioned earlier, there's this thing known as the Antiquities Act, and what that does is it basically gives the president unilateral power, some would argue, to set aside land for national monuments. But clearly, it has yet to be challenged in court. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be, and it doesn't mean it can't be undone. We simply haven't seen an occasion where that has actually happened. Let me share just a bit of what Jason Chaffetz is saying about this. Of course, Congressman out of the great state of Utah, clearly not very happy about what the president has decided to do. He says in a statement, look, after years of painstaking negotiations with a diverse coalition, Utah had a comprehensive bipartisan solution on the table that would have protected the Bears Ears and provided a balanced solution. There's the words you want to focus on, a balanced solution. Instead, the president's midnight proclamation cherry-picked provisions of the Public Lands Initiative and disregarded the economic development and multi-use provisions necessary for a balanced compromise. Mike Lee, senator from Utah, also tweeted this, Leland. He said it's an arrogant act by a lame duck president. So in case you're wondering, no, the fight apparently is not yet over. Back to you.
Won't be till January 20th. Kevin Corke live in Honolulu. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, race against time for the Obama administration. With just weeks remaining in the president's term, what the administration is trying to get done. We were just talking about that. Plus, why it may not stand once President-elect Trump takes the White House.
And caught on camera, brazen criminals, get this, using heavy machinery to rip an ATM from its foundation. We'll tell you how this ended coming up next.
Still an ATM. I guess this is one way to do it. Take a look. Caught on camera, burglars in Texas using a skylift to plow into, knock over, and then lift up this ATM. It is believed that it was then loaded into a stolen U-Haul truck. Police are not disclosing how much cash was in the ATM, but they are asking for information from anyone who may have it and for them to come forward.
Run through the tape is the standing order for the last days of the Obama administration. In the past week, we've seen a major and long-lasting policy shift on Israel. Kevin Corke reported on new federal monuments a few minutes ago, and there are new 11th hour government regulations as we speak. Some of those could be very hard for President-elect Trump to undo. Deneen Borelli, chief political correspondent for Conservative Review, Fox News contributor, Jessica Tarlov, Democratic pollster, senior political strategist for Schoen Consulting. Ladies, nice to see you.
Courtney.
We have a little list from the Hill of more regulations possibly to come. Occupational safety. Evidently, the Obama administration is upset about metal in water. Forced arbitration in credit card bills. Incentive-based compensation for Wall Street. And they're going to restrict that. Some stuff on stoves in terms of what your house stove can do to help the environment, and regulations on organic meat. Jessica, I know that there's a much longer list that you would like to see. We'll get to that in a minute. Deneen, what's the point here? A lot of these can just be undone come January 20th.
No, you're absolutely right. I think Obama is basically still having his little temper tantrum because Hillary lost, and his legacy is going to be overturned once Donald Trump is in office. And if you look at the burden that these regulations, the cost of these regulations that they incurred on our economy under Obama's watch, since he's been in office, over 20,000 regulations have been issued at a cost of $100 billion to our economy. So our economy is limping along. These regulations don't help. And I do think Obama is trying to advance his left-wing agenda. But yes, they can be overturned under President-elect Trump.
Big picture, though, Jessica, is this the right way for President Obama to try to secure his legacy, doing what he did with Israel at the UN, all these new government regulations, federal monuments? Or should he sort of say, hey, look, elections have consequences? I think I heard that line once before. And I'm going to just sort of gracefully end my last couple of months in office.
Well, I don't know why it's not graceful to use your last 20 days. I mean, that's what he's entitled to, right? He won that election fair and square, and he's got the time. These regulations, yes, there have been huge costs, but if you take the stoves, you look at that over the course of the next 30 years, that's going to save Americans $11 billion. So there's a high cost right out of the gate, maybe, but down the line, it's going to help Americans. He's trying to protect us from environmental disasters. In terms of Wall Street compensation, what he's looking at doing is the last enforceable rule from Dodd-Frank, which he's defended throughout his term. So I think that it makes sense to do it. Donald Trump can't overturn it, and then there's the Congressional Review Act, so Congress can get involved. We're in the minority. We don't have a lot of power left, and we have 20 days, so let us have it, please.
Let us have it, please.
But what's good about this, from my perspective, is the Congressional Review Act, because this is something that Congress can vote on, Donald Trump can approve. They have 60 days of legislative days in order to do so. So this really goes back to June going forward.
Right.
So there is that opportunity. And again, Donald Trump is talking about rolling back regulations, get our economy moving. You know, with the
but Deneen, it's not just regulations. Some of these things can't be undone. You take, for example, what happened at the UN in the last couple of weeks of Mr. Obama's presidency. Yeah. That can't be undone by Donald Trump because China and Russia and everybody else has a veto at the UN Security Council. These things could have much longer implications than just the last 20 days, Jessica.
Absolutely, and I mean, we're seeing President Obama get major blowback from people on both sides.
He doesn't seem to care.
Why? Because he's golfing or whatever you're going to say. Yeah, I think that he does care. I think he took the decision very seriously. He sees it as a continuation of U.S. policy, and he wants to send a signal that if we want a two-state solution, that Israel continuing to extend their settlements is not working towards that. Now, listen, as an American, as a Jew myself, I'm conflicted about the entire thing, and listening to Netanyahu yesterday say that if the Palestinians don't at base accept that we have a right to exist here, how are you ever going to have peace? But yes, I mean,
is there any anger is the anger justified, do you think, among Republicans that Mr. Obama is really changing U.S. foreign policy in a way that can't be rolled back?
Well, I think it's outrageous how he is treating our allies. Think about how he treated Benjamin Netanyahu.
So it's okay to make new
years.
regulations, just not okay to do big foreign policy changes.
I think what Obama is doing has made the world much more dangerous. What he has inserted himself in doing, what happened in Israel by abstaining from the vote, I think he's just done a really, that was a bad decision, I believe, on his part.
Right.
To allow that to happen.
Jessica, well, you might sort of agree with that part. It was a bad decision. Janine, Jessica, thanks, ladies.
Half agreement.
Thanks.
All right. Heather?
Well, there are just 2 days left this year, but if you need a little extra time maybe for those resolutions, guess what? You're going to get it.